It's 10:45, so I guess I'm going to start going now. Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas. I'm from a community member of the Zcoin community. I'm here to talk to you about privacy on the blockchain. Okay, someone's coming in. Anyways, let's begin. I think it's very important whenever you're talking about cryptocurrency to have some disclosures on your financial interest in them. So I do have to say, I think it's important to say that I am invested in Zcoin as a community member and as an investor. And I also own another cryptocurrency called Monero. So those are my stakes in the cryptocurrencies that I have. I should also say that I'm just a community member. So this is just information that I compiled through my own research. And so hopefully I'll be able to explain it to you guys at a nice, good and conducive format. So you guys can do more research further yourselves. Okay, so what are you guys going to get out of this? So we're going to talk about the biggest blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain, and how that works. Why is privacy important on the blockchain? The privacy problems of Bitcoin, and some cryptocurrencies that have emerged to fill these gaps. Monero, Zcoin, and Zcash. And basically the protocols that they run on top of. We'll go through some questions, and we have time, we get bonus stuff. Bonus stuff is always fun. So if people are already familiar with the Bitcoin blockchain and how transactions work on that, just bear with me for a bit, because I'm sure everyone here isn't. So I want to get everyone into the same point. Also, we're going to stay sort of high level. We're not going to go into the weeds. So if you're looking for more of a go into the weeds kind of talk, this is going to be it. Okay, so background on Bitcoin. Actually, by a show of hands, how many of you guys own Bitcoin, know about it? Okay, a lot of you, okay. Does anyone actually know how the transactions work? How many people know about how they work, sort of? Okay, a couple as well. Okay, so for those of you that know, it'll be just a review. So Bitcoin is cryptocurrency. Basically, the idea behind a cryptocurrency is to exclude middlemen from this process. So no banks, nothing. It's just two individuals exchanging value. It's created by Satoshi Nakamoto. We don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. It's not really important to know exactly who he is for his technology to be important. We don't know if it was a group of people or if it was a single person. It's created in 2009. One of the things that I find really interesting about it is that encoded in the first block that was ever mined in Bitcoin, and we'll go into blocks later, there was a message that was written that said, the Times, the 3rd of January 2009, Chancellor on the brink of bailout for banks. So Bitcoin was a lot of people say that Bitcoin was a response to the continuous bailouts of the banking industry. And some people believe that Satoshi Nakamoto is actually from the UK or of living in the UK, because that was the headline of the Times on January 3rd, 2009. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Bitcoin transaction lifecycle. So let's say that Rob wants to send some Bitcoin to Alice. And Alice is at the end of this transaction flow. So the first thing that Rob would do is he'd open up his wallet and get whoever's their address, which is basically kind of like a mailing address. You fill in the amount and the fee you want, and you send that transaction on to you broadcast that transaction out to everyone else. So when you broadcast this transaction out to everyone else, there's a bunch of these network nodes. And there are these people called miners. And what the miners do is they will try to figure out this, this hash, which is basically, this cryptographic hash allows them to append your transaction onto the blockchain. So it's not essentially you putting your transaction onto the chain. It's someone, you're saying that you want this transaction to be appended. You put it into the transaction pool. The miners decide that they want to take your transaction and put it onto the pool when they put it onto the end of the blockchain when they find this hash. So once they solve this proof of work, which is basically they figure out this hash, it's broadcasted to the rest of the network. The nodes verify that this hash is valid and that the transactions are valid, and then it's broadcasted to the rest of the network. So after this happens, what you get is called a confirmation. So confirmation means that one block has been created since that time. So when you do your transaction, you get the block. The miners fill the block. They validate the block. They connect at the end of the blockchain. That's confirmation. And then every time this process continues, you'll get more added confirmations. And confirmations are basically blocks that have been created since your last transaction. So it's a very arduous process, but once it gets down to it, it's a very sort of simple thing that you can wrap your head around. So now we're going to talk about where the problems of this, the privacy problems of having a transaction like this. So basically the problem ends up to everything is recorded and never forgotten. So each node stores every transaction on the blockchain. And as you may think, that it's actually fairly easy to trace Bitcoin transactions from people to people. So if we were, it's fairly easy if you look at the picture on the right, you could see that if we have an example kind of ledger, this is, or obviously in a real ledger we would have hashes for transaction addresses and stuff like that. But this is essentially the idea. You have a ledger with people's names on it, and they transfer value between each other. So you can easily see that to get from atom back to atom, you could see the flow of Bitcoin, and that when Adam transferred some to Mitch, and then Mitch transferred some to Ian, and then Ian transferred some to Adam, you could tell that those 0.5 Bitcoins that Ian transferred to Adam actually were originally from Adam. So this brings us to the problem that Bitcoin has, is which it's pseudonymous and not anonymous. So what that means is essentially your anonymity is tied to the address that you own. And your addresses that you own are essentially your identity. So those addresses aren't anonymous because they're situated with your identity. So what we need to fix this problem is a property of currency called fungibility. And essentially what that means is there's no difference between one coin and another coin. So we have that in money. If you look at your quarters, your nickels, and your dimes, they all look fairly similar from each other except for a few marks. But if I showed you a quarter from one year and a quarter from another year, you wouldn't be able to tell which quarters they were, who they were from. So now, why is this? So why is it important that we're not being able to track our purchases? So there's something called chain analysis that can be done on the blockchain technology, because really blockchain technology brought this stuff on a global scale. meaning that you're no longer concerned about just the, like maybe the average people you see doing transactions with following your spending, but anyone on a global scale could follow your spending because the blockchain, you can run a node anywhere. Yeah?
Let's hear the worst part. Someone pays you Bitcoin that has been blacklisted because it was involved in a ransomware attack or something. And then you realize that that Bitcoin is practically worthless.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about that as well. Because there are a couple ways to do chain analysis, and one way is to, as he was saying, talking about blacklisting certain addresses, and all those Bitcoins on that address are considered stolen or nefarious in some way. And then this chain analysis is used to discover how many Bitcoins on the Bitcoin network actually are tainted in some way. It's not only just for tracking your spending habits, but there's a really good video on Computer File on YouTube that talks about the different ways, the different algorithms that you can use in chain analysis. So one of them is a percentage-based algorithm where only a portion of the coins are considered tainted. So you can follow the tainted coins through the chain and detect non-detainted. Basically, you differentiate the coin from the address. So all the coins on an address aren't tainted, just the tainted coins. So when you send a percentage of that coin to another address, you would track the difference between addresses and the difference between the actual amount of coinage. So for example, if I transferred in 1 Bitcoin to an address that held 2 Bitcoins, now I have 3 Bitcoins in that address, but one of those Bitcoins is tainted. So if I transfer 1 Bitcoin out to another address that doesn't have any Bitcoin, that 1 Bitcoin would be now considered the tainted Bitcoin, and those 2 Bitcoins would be considered safe. But there are some which do the whole sort of tainting algorithm, which means that once you get tainted Bitcoins in your wallet, all your coins are tainted, because people assume that if you get tainted Bitcoins, then you are associated with nefarious things.
Then couldn't someone who has just a lot of tainted Bitcoin just send them to everybody?
Yeah, so that's one of the problems that with chain analysis. It would be very expensive to do something like that, because it's more of if you accidentally get tainted coins, like from someone that did things nefarious, you wouldn't know that they were tainted unless you used one of these algorithms, which you might not have access to. Because the Bitcoin blockchain is gigabytes long, so it takes a long time to get through all that data. Going back to tracking spending habits, you could track spending habits, and whether it be from governments or from individuals that are just interested in following you. And that's why you want to make sure that you report your cryptocurrency earnings if you do manage to sell up, because the government is working on stuff like this to track people who own Bitcoin holdings and also hold different cryptocurrencies. There are a bunch of contractors working on this. Funny enough that one of the things that people say that cryptocurrencies are really good for is money laundering. Well, it's funny because it's actually really bad. They're actually pretty poor for that, because you think of it, the only exit strategies and entrance strategies are to get Bitcoin is to go to an exchange where the exchange asks for your information, which goes into know your customer and anti-money laundering laws. So they actually have all that information on you already. So if you start selling a whole bunch of Bitcoin into US dollars, basically the exchange will know that something nefarious is happening there. So Bitcoin actually sucks then. Well, there are actually a couple of what were called BIPs, which are Bitcoin improvement proposals to essentially fix some of the problems with Bitcoin. These are the big ones right now, stealth addresses and payment codes. So they essentially allow for you to have a single public address. So instead of having a whole bunch of Bitcoin addresses situated with you, you would only have one address that you would be able to have that would generate several different sending addresses that you would use. But it's essentially the same thing as creating a new address per transaction. So it's more of a convenience for people who are too lazy to because you should really never use a Bitcoin address more than once, because that's another way that you can track your transactions. There's also another thing called confidential transactions, and what that allows is to hide the value that you're transacting. So using cryptography, essentially you'll encrypt the amount that you're sending, and so no one will actually know, except for the person who received it, what the amount actually was. The problem with this, though, is it creates a very large transaction. So about 6 times the size of a normal transaction, with 3 times using a newly compressed algorithm that's being developed. But this is one actually the strengths of Bitcoin, is that it doesn't move as rapidly as other coins. Because then you know that the technology that's built on Bitcoin is fairly secure, because over these long strand of 10 years that Bitcoin's been around, there's been no big cheats for it. So we're going to talk about one of the first ways to obscure your transactions on the blockchain. That's using coin mixers. Now, this is the easy thing to do. It's basically a service where you deposit your coins and mix them with other users. So there's basically a wallet address, you deposit to that wallet address, and then whenever you want to spend your Bitcoins, you tell the service, well, I deposited so many Bitcoins there, and then send them to this address. But obviously that requires a trusted setup, because you're trusting the party to hold your Bitcoins. They're no longer your Bitcoins anymore, they're the mixer's Bitcoins. So essentially you obscure your transactions by pulling them all to one address and then sending them off somewhere else. As we discussed that before, there could be problems with that because tainted coins. So the next improvement to coin mixers was called CoinJoin. And CoinJoin is basically mixing in a trustless setup. So you don't have to trust any of the parties involved in this process. So one of the benefits of CoinJoin is that it's very simple and lightweight to easy to implement, not only on Bitcoin, but other coins as well. Because all you're doing is you're redirecting the outputs of a transaction. The problem with it, though, is that you need people to be wanting to use this when you do your transaction. So if I decide to do a transaction, there needs to be another person that's willing to do a transaction as well. And so if you can't use it if there's no one else that wants to do a transaction. So now we're going to go talk the 3 big cryptocurrencies. You have Monero, which uses the crypto note protocol, Zcoin, which uses the zero coin protocol, and Zcash, which uses the Zcash protocol. And now there may be other coins that have bigger market caps than these 2, but Monero is probably the biggest one. But the reason why I'm going to talk about these is because these are the coins that all the other coins get forked off of. Because these are the people who implemented the technology first. So you have the Monero team, the Zcoin team, the Zcash team. As you can see, there's been multiple forks of each of these coins. So starting with Monero, you have Monero Zero, Monero Original, Monero Classic, and Monero TAC Classic. That one's my favorite. You see, they're not very original with some of their naming schemes. And then for Zcoin, we have Smart Cash and Zoin. And Zcash, you have Z Classic, Zcoin, Bitcoin Private, and Hush. And those are all ports of Zcash. So let's start with Monero. So one of the most interesting things about Monero is that it's not a fork of the Bitcoin code. So a lot of the cryptocurrencies that we have nowadays are forks of the Bitcoin core code with added features tacked onto them. And so it's very unique to see a coin with an original code base. So Monero uses ring signatures to pull off its cryptography. Ring signatures are a method to obscure parties involved in a transaction. So the way it works is essentially if Alice, Bob, and Carol are all making a transaction, they all sign together as one, and then that transaction includes all of them, and then it's sent off to the different recipients. So this is essentially how Monero transaction works. And this is very complicated when you look at this screen here, so I'm going to break it down into very simple terms. So what I like to say called for dummies, aka B. So essentially it's automated mixing. So the problems I talked about before with CoinJoin, you don't have them here. You can make a transaction at any time and your transactions will be mixed with other people on the network. So the way this works is you create a transaction, it scans for other outputs, and it uses those as dummy inputs. Yeah?
Is there a relationship of any of this to proof of work, proof of stake, proof of duration method? Like, how does that get tied into this?
The way that works is in validating that they are valid transactions. So Monero uses proof of work as well. So proof of work is essentially if I'm going to say that I'm going to have a transaction between you and me, I can't just say I have 1,000 Monero and give it to you, right? There has to be someone who verifies that I actually have the 1,000 Monero, attaches it to the blockchain, and says you now have the 1,000 Monero, right? So that's the process of mining. It's people verifying those transactions, finding. The idea is that you spend so much energy finding this this cryptographic hash that lying about it would be too costly than instead of just taking the fee that I provide you and appending it to the transaction. Proof of stake and proof of duration are similar methods. They work on a sort of the same, they do the same thing as proof of work, except they have different, they have the same purpose, but do it different ways, and I won't go into that in this talk, but they have the same purpose. Proof of work, you spend energy to verify the chain. Proof of stake, you basically offer up coins, lock them up for a bit to verify the chain. And proof of duration, I'm not very familiar with, but I assume you lock your coins for a certain amount of time, and when you lock them up, that basically means that you'll lose them if you're a bad actor or something. So it's the same, Monero, automated mixing. When you do a transaction, you have an output of that transaction. That output of that transaction is used as a dummy input for other people's transactions. So now when I was saying about Alice, Bob, and Carol, Alice might do a transaction, and then her transaction output might become a dummy input for maybe Bob's transaction or something like that. So that would be going back to here where you have all these output transactions next to the new transaction. You have all those outputs down there. They become inputs for a new transaction. So you have incoming and transaction and the new transaction. And the outputs from the incoming transaction become the inputs of the new transaction.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Are those unspent outputs? Is that what you're talking about for the outputs? Or are those?
The outputs are, it doesn't matter in a sense, because if I do a transaction and I get, and there, so if I say I'm going to spend, Bob is sending coins to Carol, right? Bob sends 1 coin. And let's say he has 3 coins and he sends 1 coin. So the output of that transaction would be that the 1 coin is spent and the 2 coins are also an output as well, because they get redirected to a new address.
And those are the ones that are used for dummy?
Yeah. Okay, so now let's talk about more about the crypto note weighted. So one of the benefits of CryptoNote is that you don't have to think about privacy. It's on by default. If I do a transaction, it's by default. Another benefit is it increases anonymity over time, because when you do a transaction and you get your outputs, those outputs are used in other transactions. So as it goes down the chain, it's harder to find your original transaction. The other benefit of CryptoNote is it hides the transaction amounts. So when you send 1 Monero, they actually don't know that you send a Monero. Only the sender and the receiver know it, but the blockchain itself does not know the amount that was sent. And this is done through a process called ring CT, which basically takes the ring signatures that we were talking about, where a whole bunch of people sign for 1 transaction, so they're all involved in that 1 transaction, and the confidential transactions that we were talking about before, that was a proposal for Bitcoin, which hides the transaction amounts. So you take those 2 technologies together and you get ring CT. Now let's talk about some of the cons of CryptoNote. Scalability. So one of the biggest problems of blockchains right now is the amount of space that they take up over time. So one of the problems with Monero transactions is that they're 15 to 25 kilobytes, which and Bitcoin transactions are 500 bytes. So that's a large. If you look over thousands of transactions that are done over time, the Monero blockchain is going to create exponentially more than the Bitcoin blockchain. Okay, so another one of these problems is ring size. So when I was talking about before, how when you have a transaction and you have these certain number of inputs and outputs, right? So the number of people that can be inside that transaction are the ring size. And the ring size by default in Monero is 5. So when you have these inputs and outputs, the only 5 other people can sign in this transaction. So if you only have 5 other people in this transaction, then you can see that there will be a problem of traceability. And there's also a paper that Zero Cash put out, which is a competing cryptocurrency, that showed how you can track Monero transactions. So, but Monero did have a rebuttal to that, so if you want to read more about that, you can find that easily by looking on the Monero site. One of the also problems with CryptoNote is the audibility of it. So one of the important things about cryptocurrency is to make sure that the supply is audible, because if it's not audible, then if there's a problem in the protocol, then what could be happening? You could have coins created out of nowhere. So something goes wrong with the cryptography, or something goes wrong with the implementation of the coin, then you might just create 5 coins out of nowhere. There's been problems with this recently with overflows and underflows. That's why it's important to think about those things when you're programming, because you might just give someone $1 billion one day. So the reason why you can't audit the crypto note protocol or the Monero blockchain is because of these the ring signatures that hide with confidential transactions. So the confidential transactions hide the amount that's being sent. So if you don't know the amount that's being sent, you can't audit it. You only know you can, however, audit the mining algorithm, because you get a reward every time you mine a block, which every time you verify a transaction, you get a certain amount of coins, and those things are verifiable on, they're auditable because you can see that the reward was given this block. Okay, so now let's talk about some family problems between ZeroCoin and Zerocash. So ZeroCoin was actually a previous protocol of Zerocash. So Zerocash is said to be the continuation of the ZeroCoin protocol, but I find the benefits of ZeroCoin outweigh those of Zerocash. ZeroCoin and Zerocash both rely on the same sort of cryptography, which are called zero-knowledge proofs. Zero-knowledge proofs are very strange. I'm going to try to explain them. So essentially, if we're in a maze and you have Victor who creates this maze, and he has 2 exits, A and B, and there's another person called Peggy, and Peggy is supposed to solve this sort of maze. So Victor creates the maze, Peggy enters the maze, Victor exits, and then Victor then chooses the path that Peggy should exit by. So if he chooses A, then Peggy has to exit through A. If he chooses B, then Peggy has to exit through B. But there's also this barrier here that's blocking Peggy from getting to the other side, right? So Peggy needs to be able to find the hidden trap door within this maze. So if Peggy knows where the hidden trap door is, it doesn't matter which path she goes down, she'll be able to reach to the exit. Okay? And essentially the idea is that if you do this thousands and thousands of times, if Peggy is able to get the right answer, that means that you know the information that you're trying to prove. So the idea is that you're proving that to someone that you know a piece of information without stating the information. So for example, if I know that if I know what your favorite color is, no, the maze is probably the best example that I could think of right now. So you're knowing that you know the way to the exit of the maze without stating the path. Okay, so let's go first talk about Zcoin. So Zcoin works in a process of where you burn coins and redeem them later. So on the top here on A, we have the Bitcoin blockchain, and this is how transactions will work on the Bitcoin blockchain. So you have Bitcoin moving through the top, and then on Zcoin, you'll have these things that are mints. And mints happen, as you can see, certain intervals where a user decides to burn the coin and redeem it at a certain point. So you can do these redeems on certain blocks, and it's basically like the block, you get a portion of it's like you mined the coin again. It has no transaction history. It's a new coin. nothing related to it. It's just like you mined it off the chain. And the idea behind zero coin is that you prove that coins were burnt and not which coins were burnt. So only, there's no relation between the coins that you burn and the coins that you redeem. So let's talk about the pros and cons of zero coin. So the pro is you can mint new coins with no history. All the methods before that we've talked about, these coins will have history. The anonymity, yes, thank you, increases with time. So one of the benefits of zero coin is that zero coin, you burn coins at certain denominations. So if you burn a coin, if you burn 5 coins and 10 other people burn 5 coins as well, you're getting the increase of anonymity between those 10 people. And as this goes on, without you redeeming them, that subset grows and grows and grows and grows until you have thousands of transactions. You're not going to get something like that with Monero, because Monero, you'll send a certain amount of money and then, or a certain amount of coins, and then those outputs will be mixed together, but you don't get the addition of not having a history. Zero coin is also audible as well, because when you burn and spend a coin, if more coins are spent than burned, then you'll know that there's a problem. And also, when you send coins, you send it on the public chain, so the public Zcoin chain. So you'll basically have the same benefits of Bitcoin. Now going into the negatives of Zcoin. The proof size of Zcoin is one of the problems right now. It's 25 kilobytes right now, but we're working on reducing that to 5 kilobytes through some optimizations in the code. There's an initial trusted setup. So when Zcoin was created, there needed to be cryptographic parameters that were generated, and those keys had to be destroyed, or else you could break the Zcoin protocol. But instead of the developers generating their own cryptographic parameters, they used cryptographic parameters from the RSA competition that they had about 15 years ago, where they essentially said, if anyone can break this, you get a certain amount of money. And no one has ever broken those two values yet. So it's a good way to use the cryptographic parameters and add some trust into the setup, because the parameters won't generate it by the same team. You also have audibility problems with, wait, that's not supposed to be there. Okay, well, that's not supposed to be there. Ignore that. And I was going to include this quantum problems, but every cryptocurrency has problems with quantum computers, because they all revolve around cryptography that can be broken by quantum computers. But let's be honest, this will be the least of our worries if we have quantum computers that can do cryptography. Another con is you have to do the manual mint and spend. So you yourself have to think about doing the privacy transactions. So you yourself have to press the mint button and press the spend key and think about the amount of time between those mints. So if you don't mint a coin and spend it right away. So now let's go on to Zero Cash. So Zero Cash works in the same way as Zcoin, except they have special addresses called shielded addresses that allow you to send transactions when they're burnt, when you burn in those burnt coins. So before in Zero Coin, you had to burn the coins, spend them to get back into the Bitcoin chain, and then send them. But in Zero Cash, what you can do is you can burn them, get a special address that allows you to send those coins in the burnt state without going back to the public chain. So that's one of the benefits of Zero Cash, is being able to send those burnt coins. So basically, you have two address types. You have transparent addresses, which work similar to Bitcoin, and what's called the transparent value pool, which is basically transparent assets, publicly reveals all transaction data. And for private transactions, you create two public keys during the initial setup, a proving key and a verification key. The proving key allows the user to produce a proof, a zero-knowledge proof, that justifies that the initiated transaction is valid. So you have proving key and the verification key, and you publish both those keys onto the chain, so that allows you to spend those assets and on the private side. On the when you when you burn the coins, this is the proof that allows you to spend them on the private chain. When you're doing zero-knowledge proofs, you're basically saying that the input values sum up to the output values, and that's not going to be broken. So A plus B minus the outputs, which are X and Y, is greater than or equal to 0. Now let's talk about Zero Cash weighted. So Zero Cash, you can mint new coins with no transaction history, just like Zcoin. You have the added benefit of small proof sizes and verification times, so it's very fast. And you won't have the problems with size that you do with Zcoin. The cons is you have experimental cryptography, it's called ZK snarks. Experimental because it uses an assumption that can be derived from any other assumption. So the cryptocurrencies before, like Zcoin, were based on what's called the discrete log problem. The discrete log problem is basically, the idea behind it is that you can't, given 2 points, you can't find a point in between them. You could verify that there's a point in between them, but it's very hard to find out which point that is. But don't ask me to explain it any further, because it involves a lot of advanced cryptography. If you do want to read about it, Vitalik Buterin, which the creator of Ethereum, wrote an article about it, and it goes into the proofs and the technical details behind it. People consider this technology shakier than elliptic curve technology, which is the other, like what Zcoin and Monero are Zcoin is based on top of. There's also a controversy between this trusted setup, because the trusted setup of Zcash was done by the developers. So I believe there were 6 developers that did it. So they essentially, each developer got a pair of parameters, submitted them together, and they created the trusted setup, and then supposedly disposed of the keys. But we'll never know if they actually did. So some people are okay with that. I'm a little wary about it. Same thing with Zcoin. If the parameters are leaked from the trusted setup, or there's a problem with the cryptography, then you get coin forgery. So people can create coins. They do have a new technology called ZK Starks that's supposed to remove this trusted setup, which will be interesting. And then auditability is also a problem as well, because shield addresses, since you can send transactions through sealed addresses, they force the supply not to be auditable. Okay, does anyone have any questions about anything that I talked about today? Yeah.
You were talking about the tainted Bitcoins earlier.
Yes.
Is that just something that some organizations are observing, or is it like part of the protocol? Is it built in?
It's something. It's not built into the protocol, which is the problem. And it's something that other people are doing. So, for example, if there's different organizations that do it, but it's not built into the protocol.
But since you can see the whole blockchain, couldn't you say, okay, I'm going to purpose to acquire some tainted Bitcoins, and if I need to build up my storage, just add more Bitcoins to that wallet, and then I'm going to scan the ledger and see who's got the biggest Bitcoin wallets, and then you just send a couple of Satoshis. Now you've maybe you've spent some fees, but for $60, maybe you've taken $100,000 worth of Bitcoins and made them tainted.
Yeah, that's why they're trying to develop different sorts of algorithms, because you'll have that problem in the future where you'll say this wallet has a percentage of coins that are tainted. So 10% of these coins are tainted or something like that. Or like I said, I was talking about before, how they'll track certain amounts of coins. So the first transaction that you make sending coins will be the tainted coins, and those tainted coins will move off, and you'll see which addresses have tainted coins and which of the ones don't. It's not, no one's decided this is the process in which we decide these coins are tainted. There's just people saying, this is a method to do it, this is a method to do it, and this is another method to do it. There's like 3 or 4 different algorithms on how to do that.
Isn't there a vested interest if someone decides these coins are tainted? You can make the price of Bitcoin go up because you're taking some out of the pool. So if
the thing is, they'll still be there.
Yeah.
There's no way to remove the coins from the blockchain. They'll always be there. So you can't really remove them. You can just say that they were tainted at some point, and the percentage at which they were tainted. And the fact is that, like, I think it was like 80% of the coins are actually tainted already, even if they're going through exchanges. So that's why people are developing privacy coins, so you don't run into problems like that. So you have the trait of fungibility, where you can't tell one coin from another coin. Yeah?
Well, it seems to me with a cap on it, the concept of tainting a coin as opposed to the person who did the bad transaction isn't sustainable. I mean, are we going to just grow past this thought of tainting a coin?
Well, the current thought for doing chain analysis is that you mark specific addresses, and those coins are now tainted, whether from theft or and that's why ordinary people are saying that it's not a good idea to do this, because you'll eventually taint the whole supply, or it will become unusable.
You can go after a whale and you can drive up the price of Bitcoin or whatever crypto.
Just make it harder to. I mean, if you're organized crime and you're like, hey, if I taint enough Bitcoin, then everybody will just shrug at it and it doesn't matter.
I mean, I don't think necessarily a lot of people do the chain analysis on coins before they send or receive them. And there's no way to tell if the coins are tainted before you receive them. So you're kind of out of luck if you receive some tainted coins. That's why we're saying that we should try to get this idea of fungibility, so we don't have to deal with this down the road of the government saying, we use this, we found that your coins are tainted, we're seizing them from you. So that's why it's important to have protocols that make it so you could create coins that are no longer tainted. Yeah?
There'd be no way of tainting the wallet instead of the coin?
So coins are just essentially values in a wallet. So there's no concept of an individual coin. They're just sums of coins. So for example, if I receive one coin, I'm just receiving the value of one coin, not an actual coin. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that answer what were you asking again?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to think, as he was suggesting, punish the person, not the coin. And so make it harder for someone to use their wallet instead of taint coins.
I mean, that's the problem with cryptocurrency is then who decides the coins are tainted, and like, if you start putting restrictions on who can send coins, then you're back to the same system that you had before.
You could generate new wallets, like,
Yeah, that's a good point.
for water.
Yeah. So like, the point of cryptocurrency is having the freedom to be your own bank. So you can decide not to do, like, if people send you tainted coins, you can decide not to do further transactions with them because their coins are tainted. But there's no one entity that says these are tainted coins and these are bad, kind of thing. Because if we did something like that, we'd just be back in the same banking system.
So to say a coin is tainted, it's an opinion, a value judgment, that this coin was involved in a transaction that I think is bad.
Yeah, so like...
And so what the anonymous currencies do is they just prevent you from being able to track that. They
Track spending, yeah.
You're not able to attach the badness to a coin. You're not able to correlate the badness with the coin.
Yeah. Anyone else?
At what point do the coins become tainted? Is it at the miners, or is it the nodes verifying them?
It's usually from some external behavior, like, so...
Well, I understand that, but at what point do they become tainted? Is it, I mean, I understand why, if you track it, you see, this
Okay.
is used for ransomware or whatever.
Let me try to give you an example. So let's say that there's a ransomware that came out and they give you an address to send coins to that address to pay off the ransom, right? So if you send coins to that address is tainted because it was basically used in a ransomware attack.
Okay.
So all coins that are sent to there are considered coins from a ransomware attack.
Okay.
So that's the problem.
Yeah.
The address.
Well, yeah, because you can find somebody who's got a ton, and if you're able to compromise that, and like what he was saying earlier, I think it's not sustainable.
Well, yeah, so that's one of the things that privacy coins are trying to solve is if we have these algorithms that now find which coin...
You missed my point. What I'm saying, when I say not sustainable, I mean that it doesn't seem like people care.
I wouldn't say they don't care.
Bitcoin, and there's a lot of investment that's looking to go into it, EFTs and things like that. So
I'd say that they care, but there's just not enough knowledge behind it, because knowledge behind how transactions work, so that people know that Bitcoin isn't anonymous and that these transactions do have bad coins with them. Yeah.
Who is it that cares that they're bad coins?
yeah, so
Like if somebody gives me change at the cash register, I don't know that $5 bill was used in a crime 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, so that's the whole
I
point.
still want to spend it like a $5 bill, so I don't really care at that point.
Yeah, that's the whole point.
So,
Well, I would
but
think
right
that-
now we could just not care about whoever says these coins are bad. If we just don't listen to them,
ignore them.
I mean, what if the government tells you that the coins are bad and points a gun to your head and says, give me your coins?
receiving
That's the
I
problem.
don't have those coins anymore.
Receiving stolen property, it doesn't matter if you didn't know it was stolen. If you got
Yeah.
a computer, you received it, it's stolen property. The police are still going to take it away from you. So
Yeah.
there is a consideration there.
Does that make sense, or?
Yeah, it's just I don't know if if I buy a laptop that turns out to be stolen, but I've already sold it to somebody else, I don't know. Am I committing a crime too at that point?
That's the whole idea that we're trying to avoid is you don't want to have to think about, are my coins tainted when I send them?
Right.
You just want to be able to spend your money without being scared about or receiving money without having fears that your coins are bad in some way.
We still have that problem with cash.
Yeah, but
You can come to me and say.
you don't have people tracking, like, the only way a transaction is valid is if it's written down. You don't have a global chain of people that have every cash transaction written down, right? So this is where the big problem comes in, because there's every cash, think of it like every cash transaction written down. All the money that you've ever received in your life is written down somewhere, and everyone has a copy of it. So with cash, we don't have that problem. If I give you $5, you don't know where that $5 come from, but you'll take it as $5, and you won't be afraid that someone will come up and say, oh, that guy was actually a drug dealer and he just gave you $5 or something. You'll go on and spend it like it's just $5 and that guy just gave me $5, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm just not happy with how the world works.
I think like cash is tainted because it's all got trace amounts of cocaine and semen.
Exactly. Or it was in a robbery and it was marked and whatever, and it doesn't seem like that's my responsibility. And I shouldn't be punished for being another victim of things happening. But
I don't know that we can attribute a negative connotation to what is in essence just an equation, just bits. It's the people doing
Right,
it.
right,
It's not,
exactly.
it's not
So-
math.
you have to go after the people who did the bad thing, and not the people who happen to have ended up with the problem.
So these anonymous coins are actually going to be preferred by people who want to engage in activities that are considered tainted, aren't they?
I mean, I'm not necessarily, because you still have the problems that you had before of traceable transactions.
Right.
Do you really want everyone to know about every purchase you've ever made?
But, well, say if you were doing a blackmail in Zcash, would they be able to trace? I was assuming that they would not be able to trace your transactions.
You might not be able to trace the Zcash, but when you take the Zcash and try to convert it back into euros or pounds or whatever, you need some entry and exit point. That's why saying that cryptocurrencies aren't that great for doing stuff like this, because you can only either buy things with their cryptocurrency, or you have to go through a exchange where they write down all your information and say you're taking out this amount of money. And if you take out a certain amount of cash, obviously that's reported to with the federal authorities if it looks suspicious.
Okay, but in the long run, aren't we looking for a world where people don't cash out of crypto, that they use the crypto to?
But I mean, you still have the problems that you have with cash as well. Like, people will use cash for bad things all the time, but we still use cash and we don't have a problem with it.
I wasn't saying that was a reason not to use it, but I was saying that it would be more it would seem to be more popular among people trying to do things that are considered tainted.
I mean,
Monero's the leading one for that, isn't it?
I believe Monero is used a lot more because it's just the mining algorithm that it uses is it has a higher market cap as well, so it's easier to put more money into it.
It seems to be the preferred crypto, to what his point, which is for people who maybe want to do bad things. Is that right?
Or I wouldn't necessarily call them bad things. Not all illegal things are bad.
Right. Things
but-
that they don't want somebody.
But tainted, I guess is an all right word.
I only know of one darknet market that takes Monero. Everything else takes Bitcoin. So
Yeah, it's all about liquidity. So a lot of people, it's easier to sell your Bitcoin than sell Monero. But I think what people would do is take Bitcoin, transfer it into another cryptocurrency, use that, and then use that cryptocurrency, transfer it back into Bitcoin. I don't know, but
It's called money laundering.
yeah. But the thing is, you can't really. When you try to take that money out and put it into dollars or something like that, like I said, there's always going to be that constraining point of an exchange, because if you take out large amounts of money, then that's just gonna be a big red flag. So I honestly don't think that cryptocurrency is great for money laundering at all, because people are still using other things to launder money today. If it was so great, then everyone would be using it, you know? Yeah?
Hey, you might as well just go back to using a washing machine to launder money.
I mean, I'm pretty sure the laundromats are still used for that, so, you know. Essentially, it boils down to is people wanting, like good people, well, honest people wanting to use a means of exchange to transact globally for a low fee, avoiding middlemen, and without needing to worry about if their transactions are going to be tracked and they're going to be implemented in something that they didn't do.
It kind of goes to the idea of the more people that use crypto on the internet, the better it is for everybody.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, people might do bad things with a certain coin, but the more people that use it, the safer it is for everybody.
Yeah.
Because bad people will always do bad things somehow.
Yeah. I mean, people are gonna find, people want to do, I've always thought that if people want to do something, they're gonna figure out a way to do it no matter what. So, yeah. Anyone else have anything? I think it's
Thank you.
11:45, yeah.